Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Nicholas Murad. I'm a professor of philosophy and religious studies here at Chandler-Gilbert Community College. And on behalf of the Philosophy and Religious Studies Department, I would like to welcome all students in attendance, as well as other faculty, community members, staff, and administration. And I would especially like to thank all faculty members who are here and who encourage their students to come. Before we hear from our distinguished speaker, I just want to say a few words about why I organized this event. A college education is meant to prepare students for life after college. And this can mean getting training to work in a certain industry. And in fact, classes in the humanities do prepare students to get good jobs, but the primary interest in taking classes in the humanities is to give students the conceptual tools to understand what is good and just and how we ought to live together. And if this interests you, as it should interest everybody, I invite you to take more philosophy and religious studies classes here at Chandler-Gilbert Community College. So for a student living in the United States in 2020, that means living in a country that is likely much more diverse than the smaller circle of family and friends that they interacted with before college. And this diversity is not a weakness in our country, but a strength. Yet, in order to thrive in a diverse society, a person must not be afraid of or baffled by or a total stranger to his or her neighbors. And the best way for people to learn who they're sharing their country and culture with is meeting them face to face and hearing them speak. But despite the fact that Muslims have been a part of this country since before it was founded and have made innumerable contributions to this country and the world, most Americans have never met a Muslim. And without this direct encounter, the lack of knowledge about Muslims is left to be filled by irresponsible figures in the media and politics, those with the loudest voices who spread innuendo, half-truths, and quite a few bald-faced lies. It's my hope that the event today will help to discredit the caricature of Muslims that has been aggressively promoted by some of the least knowledgeable and most powerful people and institutions in our country. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Azra Hussain is the president and co-founder of the Islamic Speaker Bureau of Arizona, or ISPA. In this capacity, she trains speakers and presents about Islam and Muslims throughout Arizona. She also plans and facilitates interfaith events and educational forums. She's one of the founding members of the Scottsdale Mosque and has served on its board for 10 years. She started and ran the Sunday school at that mosque, as well as two youth groups, the Muslim Association of Arizona for youth aged 12 to 18, and the Junior Arizona Muslims for kids 7 to 11 years old. She's been in Arizona for almost 39 years. She's married and has 4 adult children and 2 grandsons. So please join me in welcoming back to Chandler-Gilbert Community College, Azra Hussain.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is very new, I think, to many of us, and also to me. I'm much more used to coming into the college and moving around a lot more while I speak. So sitting in one place and presenting, a little unusual, but we'll all get used to it. So I'm going to talk to you today about getting to know American Muslims and their faith. And so it's pretty much an Islam 101. So if you already know some or a lot about Islam, I apologize. This is very basic information, but hopefully everyone will get something new out of this. I'm going to start my presentation by greeting all of you with a Muslim greeting, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum means peace be upon you. And the response to that is wa alaikum assalam, and may peace be upon you too. Now, the greeting is actually in Arabic, and yet whether one speaks Arabic or not around the world, if one is Muslim, one pretty much recognizes the greeting for what it is. Now, many of you may know the Hebrew or Jewish greeting, Shalom. Shalom happens to be an abbreviation of Shalom Aleichem, for which the response is Wa Aleichem Shalom, identical greetings. Now, there are some churches that where the pastor or the priest will reach out to the congregation and say, peace be with you, and people also then respond back by saying, and also with you. So it seems to be a tradition within all three of these Western monotheistic faiths to greet each other in peace. So that's what I greet you with, in peace. Assalamu alaikum. Now, the presentation I'm going to present, the topic I'm going to present today is called Islam. It's about the religion of Islam. The word itself is an Arabic word. Um, and the way the Arabic language works is all Arabic words come from 3 or 4 letter root words. In the case of this word, S, L, and M, in that order, Silm, is the root word for the word Islam. The meaning of the word Silm is peace. The best definition I can give you for this word is um, a way of life where one is trying to achieve inner peace by obeying the laws of God. A person who follows this religion is called a Muslim. Now, again, how can you tell if these two words are related to each other? Just look for that root word. You have S, L, and M in that order as part of this word. As you can see, Muslims are a very, very diverse group in terms of race, ethnicity, nationality, and language, um, and in terms of how they dress and cultures. Excuse me. Now, you've seen two words here today, Islam and Muslims, that come from the root word Silm. Have you seen another one? I greeted you by saying Assalamu alaikum. Salam, look at the word salam, S, L, and M in that order. That also comes from the same root word meaning peace. So, hey, you know a little bit about Arabic now. Um, Now, where are you going to find Muslims worldwide? Amazingly enough, our world population is over 7 billion people. And in that, according to a study done in 2017, about 1.8 billion of those are Muslims worldwide. Where are you going to find them? The largest number by and large is in South Asia. 550 million Muslims in that area, mostly consisting of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Now, the next largest population is in the Arabic speaking countries up in North Africa and Saudi Arabia and Syria, Lebanon, and those. After that, you have Southeast Asia, which includes places like Malaysia and Indonesia. Then you have the rest of Africa. Then you have Iran, Turkey. If you follow the map, you can see this. Central Asia, China, Europe, North America, and South America. So if you notice, I talked about Muslims in just about every place on our planet. About the only places I really didn't point to or talk about, maybe Siberia and Greenland. Um, and that doesn't mean that there are no Muslims up there. It just means at the time the study was done, and again, right around 2017, actually in 2017, there probably weren't populations of 1 million or more people living there, because everywhere else I, talked about has at least 1 million or more people living there. Now, when in our country here, when we hear the word Arab, people automatically assume that means Muslim. And when you hear the word Muslim, people automatically assume that means Arab. And in actually both cases, they're completely wrong. Because if you look at all of the 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide, only 15% of them are Arab. That means 85% of Muslims worldwide are non-Arab. In fact, if we look at Arabs in our country here, less than 70%, I'm sorry, almost 70%, not less than, almost 70% are Arab Christians. So of all the Arabs here, almost 70% are Christians, which means most of the Arabs we come across in our neighborhoods, in our communities, at work, they're not Muslim, they're Christians. In fact, for those of us living in Phoenix, in Arizona, do you guys know Basha's grocery store? Well, the Basha family happens to be a very, old established Arab Christian family in Arizona, and many of us already know them or know of them. Now let's go back and look at Muslims all over the world. So I told you that 15% of Muslims are Arab. Well, what am I saying when I say somebody's an Arab? Have I told you how they dress, what they eat, how they celebrate? Not really. About the only real thing I've told you when I say somebody's an Arab is that they come from families that have spoken Arabic for generations. And the reason I stress that, spoken Arabic for generations and not people who speak Arabic today is because I come from that 85% of non-Arab Muslims. I'm learning Arabic right now, and hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, I may actually get to speak it a little bit because I'm really awful at languages. But that doesn't suddenly make me an Arab Muslim. It just means at that point, I'm a Muslim who knows how to speak Arabic. The reason I say that they come from families that have spoken Arabic for generations is because language develops around a context of culture and geography and in the environment. So all of those things go up to make up a language as well. So when we say 15% of all Muslims are Arab, that's what we're talking about. Want to talk a little bit about diversity amongst Muslims. Muslims, like I mentioned, are a very, very diverse group in terms of race, ethnicity, nationality, language, cultures, all over the world. And there are many, many factors that influence each individual's behavior, right? So you and I behave differently for many reasons. In fact, my siblings and I, who grew up in the same household and with the same parents, may behave differently because we have some personal traits that are very different. On a personal level, there are things that I do and I say just because I'm a woman. There are things that I do and say because I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother. All of those things influence how I behave and the words I use when I speak. Here are some general ones, though, things that influence people's behaviors: culture, background, family and upbringing, education and economic status, political environment, and religious ideology. Now, let me give you an example. Uh, Several years back now, I used to keep saying it was 7 years ago, but it's no longer 7 years ago. I've been saying that for several years. So, over a decade ago, I had a lady from the State Department call me and said, Azra, I've got 25 foreign, Muslim exchange students, and I'd like to be able to place them in with families for a year. Could you please help me, locate some? So I went down my list of people who said they would host um, foreign exchange students. And by the time I got to about the third family, she said, no, no, stop, stop. And I said, what's going on? She said, well, I need those families not to be Muslim. I was very surprised by this. So I said, why? So she said, no, I want these students to have a full American experience. So I said, okay, that's fine. And I went down the list and gave her the remaining names of people I had who were not Muslim. Before we hung up, I said, can I just say something before we hang up? She goes, oh, sure, go ahead. And so I said, I've got 4 children. My children were born and brought up in Scottsdale, Arizona. They're brown like me. You could put on Pakistani clothes on these kids and go drop them in 4 different Pakistani homes in Pakistan. And yet these kids would still stand out like Americans. They know nothing about the culture there. They know nothing about how the teenagers grew up there, what TV shows they enjoy, what music they listen to. They know nothing about the favorite hangouts. They pretty much know nothing about Pakistan. And yet you can pick up these 4 Muslim kids and drop them in any home here in Arizona, and you wouldn't be able to tell the Muslim kids from the non-Muslim kids. And she was like, oh, thank you so much. Well, we ended that phone call. 3 weeks later, I got a call from her saying, Azra, you've got to help me. 8 out of the 25 kids is struggling. One of them hasn't eaten in 3 weeks. Obviously, he'd eaten in 3 weeks. He just ate halal meat. Halal or zabiha is the equivalent of Muslim kosher. So if the meat is not slaughtered a certain way, he wouldn't be able to eat it. So he'd been eating only vegetables for 3 weeks. Um, so I asked where this family lived and then realized that within a 10-mile radius of that home, there were 3 Muslim butchers. Um, so I told her that, and then I said, and also, even if Muslims are not able to find halal or dhabiha meat anywhere, they are allowed to go to a Jewish kosher butcher and get kosher meat. And even if they can't find that, then they can have seafood. And she goes, "Oh, that would have been nice to know." I was like, "Yeah." So we went and sorted out those problems for the other remaining 7 students. The reason I point this out is what she failed to see was the difference between culture and religion. And what that is the equivalent of saying one can be Christian, but one can't be American. That's kind of a weird thing, because in her mind, if one was Muslim, one couldn't be American as well. The families whose names I was giving were second and third generation Americans living here who are Muslim. So, those foreign exchange students would have had a very American experience, just religiously and helping them with religious accommodations. It would just have made their life easier. Needless to say, she never did that again. Moving on, many of you probably know people who go to church every week. Many of you probably also know people who never go to church. And then, some of us also know people who don't just go to church for Sunday service, but are there almost every day, either as part of committees or helping out, or, in many different forms. Well, in Islam, you're going to have the same kinds of people. People who pray 5 times a day, people who absolutely never pray, and then people who don't just pray 5 times a day, but will pray anywhere from 7 to 12 times every single day. And all of these people are Muslim. Um, but do you really believe that a person who shows up to church almost every single day thinks and acts exactly the same way as a person who never goes to church? So, painting Muslims with this huge, big, wide brush saying that all Muslims are exactly the same, it's actually very inaccurate. So, with 1.8 billion people in this world being Muslim, you're going to find people who behave in many different ways. Some who pray, some who don't, some who fast, some who don't, etc., etc. Another thing I wanted to point out is behavior contradicting religion and religious teachings. Until last year, I believe, I think that was last year, that Saudi Arabia said they would allow women to drive. I have not followed up on what that looks like today, in in reality, but until that point, women were not allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. And all of us living on this side of the world just assume that that's because Saudi Arabia has a predominantly Muslim population, so it must be Muslim laws. Well, amazingly enough, if you look at that, Muslims in Indonesia, Muslims in Turkey, Muslim women in Kuwait, they drive. In fact, in Jordan, not only do they drive, they fly planes. So um, it can't just be Islam, right? So let's go back and look at these Muslim women in Saudi Arabia who were not allowed to drive. If they needed to go to the doctor's office or go shopping or go to work, they had to have a male driver, either their husband or their father or their brother or even a son. But if those people were not available and if they had their own schedule, then you needed to get a chauffeur. And the chauffeur couldn't be a woman because women weren't allowed to drive. And that meant there had to be a male chauffeur. So what that means is if the moment the woman got in the car alone with a male chauffeur, she was breaking one of these unwritten laws in Islam, where one who's not related to a person of the other sex through either marriage um, or blood relative should not spend time alone with them. So now, because of the law of the land, these two people are now breaking, the law of their religion. And yet here we are looking in from the outside going, oh, what a restrictive religion. It doesn't let them drive. And so um, you can see how behavior may end up contradicting religion, sometimes because you can't help it, sometimes because the law of the land is forcing it. Um, and so those are some of the things we deal with. This slide I only really use to look at the right side because many of us consider Muslims in America to be recent immigrants, people who are foreigners, when in fact 80% of American Muslims are US citizens. This is according to the Pew Research Center from 2017. And in fact, 42% of American Muslims were actually born in the US. I want to talk a little bit about history of Muslims in America. Uh, like Professor Moad said, Muslims have a long history in America. In fact, according to historians, 1 out of every 5 people that was forcibly brought to this country during the Atlantic slave trade was a Muslim. And then from around 1875 until now, Muslims have immigrated to America for many, many reasons, and about the same kinds of reasons that other people came here to get away from oppressive governments, freedom of religion, better education, better jobs, but all around better opportunities for themselves and their families. And some, since 1965, when our immigration laws changed, we then had Muslim students, along with others from around the world, who came here to study and finally end up making America their home and have been here, and their children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren are now here. Along the same time, at about the same time, African Americans had started to rediscover Islam as part of their ancestral religion from when their ancestors had been brought here by force during the Atlantic slave trade. So you have that rediscovery as well coming up. Many, many American Muslims today are physicians, engineers, lawyers, scientists, in just about every career that you can imagine. And here I'm going to show you a few. Here are some famous or well-known American Muslims. You may not. I don't know how many of you would, but the young lady on your top left is Ibtihaj Muhammad, and she actually represented the US in fencing at the last Olympics. Then next to her right is Hassan Minhaj. I don't know how many of you know him. He's an actor and comedian. He used to be on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. After that is Rami Nashashibi, who is a community activist. Then you have Dalia Mogahed, who's a researcher and scholar. You have Fareed Zakaria from CNN's GPS. You have a lot of them. You may recognize DJ Khaled on the top right, maybe Dr. Oz, Bella Hadid. All of these people are famous because they're representing sports and entertainment and research and stuff. Now, here are some Muslims who are in academia. These are some people who are chairs of departments in big universities. Others, in fact, one is a founder of a liberal arts college in California. Some pretty big names as well. And here are Muslims who serve our country. In fact, this slide is a little old. It's from 2017. There are many more now, and you probably know them. They not only serve in our government, but they serve as peace officers and as military officers, as well as judges and representatives in different communities. So hopefully this helps you see that Muslims are part and parcel of the America that we live in today. I want to talk about Islam as a religion and how it's taught to Muslims. So I'm going to again give you a very brief 101 type presentation. Now, I do encourage all of you to please ask questions. They don't have to necessarily be about what I've covered here today, but also it could be things that you've always wondered about, that you always want to ask. This is a great opportunity. So I know that on YouTube you have a comment section. If you put your questions down in there, those will be relayed to me. I will get to them as soon as I finish my presentation. So please, I encourage you to ask questions. Now, in terms of Islam, what is the purpose of Islam? What does it teach? It teaches us to excel in every walk of life in terms of our inner self as well as our actions. So for Muslims, this idea of striving to be a better person from within and also to those around us is of utmost value. That shows us that, you know, we are on the path towards God, on the right path towards God. The values that Islam teaches us are to promote mercy and justice, and actually, most of all, life. And some of these values also include, you know, our respect for the earth and all of creation, because for Muslims, we are referred to, you know, in the Quran, which is the Muslim holy book, as God's ambassadors. We're here to take care of his earth and its creatures, humans and animals, and we will actually end up answering for that. And we're, you know, we are supposed to act on care and compassion for those not as fortunate as ourselves, and honesty and truthfulness is essential in Islam, as is seeking knowledge. This is not a right, it's a duty. Muslims, men and women, are required to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about how Islam is taught to Muslims. Um, excuse me. Islam is taught in three dimensions in terms of what Muslims believe, how Muslims practice, and then the goals of those beliefs and practices. Now, in Arabic, those words would be Iman, which means belief, Islam, which means practice, and then Ihsan, which actually translates to making, you know, making things beautiful or making beauty happen, but through those actions and beliefs. So I'm going to go through each one of these in a little bit of detail. So let's start off with beliefs. Muslims have 6 major beliefs, and those are God, angels, prophets, holy books, afterlife, and God's will. Now, the very first one, I'm assuming most of you have probably heard the word Allah. Allah in Arabic is the word for God. So Arabic-speaking Christians will refer to God as Allah. In fact, if you are able to find a Bible that's written in the Arabic language, in fact, you can just Google it online and say Bible Arabic PDF. You'll actually get a free one. You can just download it for free. But if you can look at this image right up on top over there on your left, top left, that is the word Allah in Arabic. You will find that word in that Bible everywhere the word God is supposed to be, because that is the word in Arabic for God. For example, if I speak only Spanish, the word I'm going to use for God is Dios. Now, Dios is going to be whether I'm Jewish or whether I'm Muslim or Hindu or even atheist, if the only language I speak is Spanish, I'm going to say Dios. If I speak German, I say Gott. If I speak Farsi, which is spoken in Iran, I'm going to say Khoda. Those are four different words I've given you for God. Does that mean there's four different gods? No, not really. What it means is there's four different languages, and each language has a different word for God. Muslims um, believe that we belong to one family, um, you know, where Judaism, Christianity, and Islam can trace their roots back to the Prophet Abraham. In fact, today these three faiths are referred to as the Abrahamic faiths, and they all three originated in the Middle East. And again, I sincerely invite you to ask questions. So please think of what you'd like to ask and go ahead and add them in the comments section here on YouTube. And I will get to them as soon as I finish my presentation. Muslims also believe in angels. We believe that God created beings of an unseen light to do his work for him. So we believe that we're surrounded by angels here, out in the universe, out in the world. We also believe in archangels. We believe that there are some angels that are above others who had, designated jobs assigned to them. Angels like Gabriel and Michael and Raphael, you can see their Arabic names, Jibril, Mikael, and Israfil. Muslims also believe that God then created beings out of minerals and clay and gave us the ability to make choices. And we believe that God then sent us teachers over and over again from the beginning of time until the Prophet Muhammad to teach us that God alone should be worshipped and that people should live good, clean, righteous lives. Don't lie, don't steal, don't kill, etc., etc. Now, these teachers are who Muslims refer to as prophets. To give you an idea of some of the prophets that Muslims believe in, you may find, if you know Bible history, you may find that you recognize some, maybe all of these names. Muslims believe that Adam was the first man on earth. Many generations later, we believe there was Noah. Many generations after that, we believe there was Abraham. Muslims believe that Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. From Ishmael's family, many generations down, we have the Prophet Muhammad, and from Isaac's family, many generations down, again, we have the prophets Moses, Jesus, and David, and many, many more. All of these and almost 100,000 more are all in Islam, prophets of Islam. We don't know the names and stories of all of them. The Quran only really talks about, and gives us the names of about 25. But there is a mention of that, thousands and thousands of different prophets who came to different peoples throughout time to teach the same message. A little bit about the Prophet Muhammad. Muslims believe that he was born in the year 570 in the city of Makkah. At the time he was born, we believe that people of Arabia were predominantly polytheists. There were some Jewish and Christian tribes in Arabia at the time, but, few and far between kind of thing. Majority of people were polytheists. We believe that Muhammad and no people around him, none of them knew that he was a prophet. And at the age of 40, while Muhammad, he had a habit of taking himself out of the city to a cave that was nearby, where he would sit alone and contemplate and think about things, where he was visited by the angel Gabriel. He was 40 years old. Muslims believe that that actually happened to be the first revelation, is the words that the angel Gabriel said to him. Muslims believe that these were the first words sent to him by God. And in fact, amazingly enough, the month of Ramadan begins this Friday, And Muslims believe that this incident took place in the last 10 days, sometime in the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan. And I will talk about that in just a little bit, as to why, during Ramadan, the Quran is considered very, very important as well. Um, Now, back to this. Of course, he then started to share this message. That's when he found out basically that he was a chosen one, that he was a prophet. He started to share this message with his friends, his family, his neighbors, anyone who would listen. And although a few people did listen and follow him, the majority of people had a real issue with this. Um, they tried to stop him. They said, he was messing with the economy of Mecca, because the tribes around Mecca were very rich as opposed to the other tribes around the rest of Arabia. They were not so well off. Mecca had already become a center of trade and pilgrimage at that time for um, caravans that would stop and rest and trade. And they actually used to worship multiple gods in the center over there. And so if a person started convincing people there was only one God, there probably wouldn't be as much, as many pilgrims coming. So they started trying to stop him. When he wouldn't listen, they went after his followers. This became very, very difficult for the followers. Um, so some of them, went to the Prophet Muhammad and said, please, we can't take this anymore. So he suggested to them that they need to go southwards to Abyssinia, which is now called Ethiopia. So several early Muslims went running down away from Mecca to Abyssinia, and he basically told them that there they would find a Christian king who was very just and who would take care of them and who would protect them. So they went, down there, but they must have been followed by some Meccans because, there was a ruckus in the streets. They were brought before the king, and the story goes that the king asked what was going on, and the Meccan spoke up first, saying, hey, these are our escaped slaves, and we've come to get them back. When he turned to the Muslims and said, are you their slaves? They said, yes. He said, then you need to go back. And one of them spoke up and said, but our prophet said that you are a just king and that you would protect us because we believe in the same God as you. And once he started questioning them, he found that Muslims not only believe and practice and have the same values as Christians, but they believe in Jesus and Mary, and that in the Quran there's a full chapter that's called Mary, where it gives us details about Mary and Jesus. And then he asked them if this is what they believe, and they said yes. So he asked the Meccans to go home, and he would protect the Muslims that were living in his country now. Meanwhile, back in Mecca, you still have Muslims suffering and being persecuted and tortured, and in some cases murdered. And this goes on for another 7 years. Finally, people from Yathrib, a settlement about 200 to 300 miles northeast of Mecca, came and spoke to Muhammad and said, we hear that you're able to, bring resolution to disputes in a fair manner, and if you can help our tribes up in Yathrib work together and live together in peace, we'll welcome all of your followers and you to live amongst us. So in the year 622, Muslims basically left Makkah and moved to Medina. The word for migration in Arabic is hijra, and the reason this year is important is because this is the year 1 for the Muslim calendar. Muslims keep track of a lunar calendar that starts in the year of the migration. Right now, we're in the year 1441, according to the hijra calendar. Muslims believe that Muhammad died at the age of 63 in the city of Medina. Now, another belief Muslims have is the belief in holy books, in scriptures. We believe in the scrolls as they were revealed to Abraham, in the Torah as revealed to Moses, in the Psalms as revealed to David, in the Gospel as revealed to Jesus and in the Quran as revealed to Muhammad. Now, since I know more about the Quran, that's the book I'm going to talk about. The word Quran means recitation. It's an Arabic word. And excuse me for a second. um, Muslims believe that it was revealed to Muhammad over a period of 23 years in the Arabic language in the form of messages that the angel Gabriel would bring to him, and then Muhammad would memorize those messages and repeat them to his followers, who would then also memorize them. And so Muslims, just like Judaism and Christianity, Islam was also an oral tradition in the beginning, and amazingly enough, still to some extent continues to be an oral tradition. Why do I say that? One thing, though, unlike Judaism and Christianity, at the time Muhammad was revealing the Quran to, he was reciting it to his followers. There were scribes that would write it down. Now, Muhammad himself could not read or write. Many of his followers could not read or write. So these, they were rolled up and put into his home, and were only brought out once he'd passed away. And people who had memorized the full Quran with him had also started passing away, and new people who were memorizing were not catching up as fast. So leadership decided that we need to have the written word, confirmed before we lost it altogether. At that time, they brought people who recited it and memorized it along with the scribes, and they sat side by side and confirmed what was written to what was recited. This process itself took many decades. So the Quran, although written down at the time it was being revealed, is still considered a recitation. So Muslims around the world, even today, are encouraged to memorize it. In fact, many of us memorize it just to be able to use it during our daily prayer, and I will get to that and explain that. But there are millions of Muslims worldwide who memorize this book from cover to cover, and some of them can't even read it. They've memorized it as a tradition that's gone from parent to child or teacher to student just orally. So it's not even something that they're able to read it, they're just able to recite it. And they know the whole book in Arabic, from beginning to end. There are 114 chapters in the Quran, but they're not chapters like you and I are familiar with. Many times a book is divided into chapters and they're about the same length long, whereas in terms of the Quran, um, there are some chapters that are 3 lines long and some that are 35 pages long. So you can imagine which ones I've memorized. I don't have a very good memory. Anyway, so the Quran is in Arabic, and Arabic, like Hebrew, is read from right to left. So when one opens the Quran, one would open it this way as opposed to this way, just because of the Arabic text. Um, for people like me who don't know the Arabic language, um, there are hundreds of translations into hundreds of different languages to help us understand the meaning of the Quran, but the original is only the Quran. There are no others. There are no versions of the Quran. There are only different translations into different languages. And even within languages, there are several different translations in English trying to explain what the Quran means in Arabic, but there is only one Quran. There are not many versions or any versions of it other than the one. um, Although the Quran for Muslims is considered a divinely revealed scripture, there is a secondary scripture that Muslims keep and follow. It is called the Hadith. These are prophetic sayings and narrations of his actions as well as his words that were compiled together about 300 years after the Prophet Muhammad passed away. So this is man created. This is, something that was passed down from, again, teacher to student, parent to child. Um, and they were confirmed. Many, the ones that are considered strong hadith have been confirmed and reconfirmed by people, the scholars who put them together. But again, the Quran, according to Muslims, is divinely revealed, and the hadith is man created. What does the hadith teach us? Sayings like the Prophet would have said, God does not look upon your body and appearance, he looks upon your heart and your deeds. Another would be the world is green and beautiful, and and God has appointed you his stewards towards it. Now, there are people who say, well, since the Quran is divinely revealed, I'm only going to follow the Quran. That's perfectly fine. But there are things in the Quran that need explanation. The one example that I use is in the Quran, it says, pray at the prescribed times. Now, you can look from the beginning to the very end, every single page. It's not going to give you the prescribed times. For the prescribed times, one has to go and look to see what the Prophet Muhammad did. How often did he pray? How did he pray? What all did he say in his prayer? How did he, conduct ritual cleansing before he prayed? All of those things are contained within the hadith. So the hadith, as long as they support what's in the Quran, those are valid for Muslims. So hopefully all of this makes sense. Um, Now, Muslims also believe in afterlife. They believe in heaven and hell. They believe in a day of judgment. Muslims do believe in a compassionate and merciful God, that if we sincerely repent and we sincerely ask for forgiveness and don't repeat what we've done, that we would be forgiven. But Muslims also have a very, very strong belief in this idea of accountability for words and actions, that on that day of judgment, each and every one of us will be held accountable for how we behaved and how we acted during our lifetime. There are descriptions of heaven and hell within the Quran and also within Hadith. And sometimes they don't really make sense to you and me as human beings here, because there are some things that we just can't even imagine. So we try, but they're not necessarily things that make sense to us. Now, the sixth belief that Muslims have is this idea of God's will, that everything in creation is God's domain, and that he knows everything that's happened in the past, what's happening currently, and what's going to happen in the future. Muslims don't believe that God is controlling everything. We believe that he, set everything in motion, gave us a bunch of rules, and that it's already happening. He's just fully aware of what is happening in his domain, in creation. Hopefully that makes sense. This discussion has been going on for centuries about, what this actually means. Scholars going back and forth. That was the simplest way that I could put that to you. Now we're going to go on to the 5 practices that Muslims have. There are 5 forms of worship and prayer that Muslims conduct on a regular basis. Uh, these are referred to as the 5 pillars of Islam, and I'm going to go through each one of these in a little bit of detail. And the very first one in Arabic is called the Shahada. The Shahada is a profession of faith. All Muslims throughout the world, at least one time in their lives, are required to make this profession of faith, truly believing these words and truly meaning them. In Arabic, it basically says La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and what that translates to is there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger, or the messenger of God. Now, I've told you I'm supposed to say this at least one time in my life. I actually end up saying it between 12 to 25 times each and every single day as part of my daily prayer. Muslims have 2 different ways that we pray. One is a personal prayer that I can conduct in any language, any time of day, all day long, as many times as I wish. And the second one is a formal physical prayer that I'm required to conduct 5 times each day, in Arabic, using passages from the Quran that I've memorized, from a young age. At the age of about 7 or so, a child is taught how to pray this formal prayer. By the time Muslims reach 10, usually is when they take on the responsibility of praying, conducting this prayer 5 times a day. Now, what are the 5 times that Muslims pray? At least conduct these formal prayers would be before sunrise, at noon, middle of the afternoon, after sunset, and then at bedtime. This prayer looks about the same whether you're a man or a woman. Doesn't matter which country one is from. One could be from Timbuktu, one could be from Norway, one could be from Canada or Australia or India or Pakistan. When you watch a Muslim conducting this formal physical prayer, it looks just about the same. They stand facing Makkah. Makkah is a city in western Saudi Arabia. During the prayer, they will bow and then they will touch their heads to the ground. They will prostrate. Those 3 actions are repeated 2, 3, or 4 times, depending on which prayer it is. For example, the morning prayer consists of only 2 repetitions of this. The noontime prayer and the afternoon prayer and the nighttime prayer have 4. So every one of these is a little bit different. Also, the basic required portion is different, and then Muslims then add in additional prayer afterwards as well. So this could last anywhere from 5 minutes all the way to 10, 15 minutes, depending on what somebody wishes to do. Now you'll notice that the gentleman in the picture is on a rug. Usually a prayer rug is used, and prayer rugs are not used because they're holy or anything special. All it really is something that's going to keep dust and dirt off of my clothing and my face because of the way I pray. Look at how the gentleman is, he's got his head, his hands, his knees all the way down on the ground. Now, if I'm praying in a public place, that's where people have been walking, they've got their, dust tracks, things that have been on their shoes. I'm not going to put my face down in that. So I just put something between me and the ground to keep dust and dirt off of my clothing and my face. So a prayer rug is not holy, it's not anything untouchable, it's just a means to keeping me clean from dirt. I've seen people who travel who've forgotten their prayer rugs that'll use a towel. One time, many, many years ago, I was in Disneyland walking down Main Street, and there was a gentleman out in the grass on my right, and he was praying. And what he'd done is taken one of those paper grocery bags, split it down the middle, opened it up, and he was using that as a prayer rug. So just basically anything between oneself and the ground, basically, is what people use for prayer. Now, you'll notice that I don't wear a headscarf, but when I pray, I will put a headscarf on to pray. Then, of course, I take it off. But Muslim women, when they pray, will wear a headscarf. Some men will wear what looks like a yarmulke, but just bigger. It comes down further onto their heads, referred to as, I guess, a kufi sometimes, but they're different variations depending on the culture, depending on the country you go to. The cap that they wear on their head will be very different. And in fact, some parts of India, they actually take a handkerchief and they wrap that on their head. This is just the men. They wrap it on their head just before they pray. So everyone has a different way of doing it. It's depends on how they grew up, what family they grew up in, what culture they grew up in. So what look the same is standing, bowing, and prostration. What may look a little different is how they're dressed, what they wear on their head, etc., etc. Now, a place to pray, like a church or a temple, for Muslims is called a masjid in Arabic, or in European languages, in English, it's called a mosque. You'll see 2 pictures up at the top over there of mosques in Ohio and in DC. Mosques around the world look very different. They don't all look the same. They don't all have domes. They don't all have these minarets and towers. But they may reflect the culture and the society they're in, the countries they're in. Now, down on your bottom left, you see the picture of an inside of a mosque. you'll notice there's little to no chairs there and all carpeting. You remember the picture, the way Muslims pray. Now, chairs would just get in the way. So Muslims just have a huge hall with carpeting. They stand shoulder to shoulder next to each other in rows and rows and bow in the same direction and then touch their heads down on the ground when we pray. Now, there are some of us who have injured knees, or some ladies who are pregnant, or elderly people who find it very difficult to go up and down, bow and prostrate. They will sit in a chair to pray. And they just join at the end of a line and they just sit while they pray. Now, men and women, when we pray in congregation, men and women pray separately. Now, that is for no reason other than for to avoid distraction. I assume these positions, and I would rather, if my clothing shifted or it didn't do what it was supposed to do, that the person behind me was the same sex as me, just because it wouldn't be a distraction for them so much. So you'll find mosques around the world that have men and women separated, but the way they separate men and women is a little different in every mosque, depending on the culture of the people who attend that mosque, depending on the amount of money the community had to build the mosque, how much real estate was available, and all of those different things come into play. For example, in the valley, we have many, many mosques. Some have one floor with men in the front, women all the way in the back, with a curtain that goes down. And so when the mosque fills up, you have men filling up, from the front going backwards, women filling up from the back going frontwards. So, the room fills up this way. Other mosques have men in the front, women in the back, and no curtain down the middle, just a space of maybe 10, 15 feet. Another mosque has men downstairs on the ground floor and women upstairs on a half mezzanine floor with a glass window. One mosque that was a house originally was very, very small, and the community grew suddenly. And so they actually ended up buying another house next door. So men pray in one house and the women pray in another. Hopefully, when the community gets enough money, they'll be able to break both of those down and build a mosque. But anyone looking at that from the outside is going to be like, oh my goodness, they put the women in a different building. Well, they did it out of necessity. The community just grew. So you and I, looking at it without knowing the details, would assume certain things. And again, the only reason for separation is to avoid distraction. So for the 5 to 7 minutes that we're praying, that we can actually concentrate on our prayer. Now you'll notice the picture at the bottom right is, you can see the women during prayer sitting in rows and rows. So that just shows you that, how people are configured when they pray. The third pillar of Islam is called zakat. It is a required donation out of our wealth. Muslims who have taken care of the needs and necessities of their own family, like food, medicine, clothing, housing, education, all of those needs and necessities are taken care of, and they have money that they did not need sitting in a savings account, extra money, that's wealth that they had sitting around for a whole year that their own family did not need. They take 2.5% of that and they give that to the needy. They give that in charity. Now, please note, this is from our wealth. This is not from our income. So there are Muslims out there who don't give zakat, who cannot give zakat because they barely have enough to feed themselves and their own families. In fact, they may be the people receiving zakat sometimes. Zakat is a very community-based um, charity, so it needs to be given to our neighbors and our communities before it goes outside. So this is very important for Muslims, that we take care of, our neighbors, our community, and then take care of those outside in another country, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the fourth pillar is fasting during the month of Ramadan. Ramadan is the 9th month of the Muslim calendar. Muslims keep track of a lunar calendar just like Jews do for their holy days and festivals. Now, there is a little bit of a difference between the Jewish lunar calendar and the Muslim lunar calendar. I believe that in a space of 19 years, I think the Jewish lunar calendar is adjusted 7 times, where they add a 13th month so that all of their religious holidays fall within the same season. Whereas for the Muslim calendar, it is not adjusted, so the 12 months just stay the same. And since the lunar calendar tends to be 10 to 12 days shorter than the Gregorian or solar calendar, you find that when you put the two calendars together once a year, there's a little bit of a shift. For example, last year, the month began on the first week of May. I think it was May 4th, and went on till June 4th or June 3rd. This year, we expect Ramadan to begin this coming Friday on the 24th of April and go on till about the 22nd or 23rd of May. And then next year, I expect it to start in the middle of April, right around the 14th or so. So you can see that once a year, it's going back a little bit in time. And in a 33-year cycle, 32.5-year cycle, the lunar calendar makes a full rotation around the solar calendar. And so 32.5 years from now, we're going to have Ramadan back at the end of April, starting at the end of April. So you can see that Ramadan can come during all the seasons. Right now, we're coming out of the summer, coming into the spring, and it's going to go through all of the seasons in the next few years. Now, what happens during the month of Ramadan? All healthy adult Muslims are required to fast from eating food during daylight hours. So from before the sun coming up to after the sun goes down, we stop eating and drinking anything. No bread, no crackers, no water. Nothing should go past our lips, not even chewing gum during daylight hours. Once the sun sets, Muslims can break their fast and, enjoy whatever it is that they want to eat and drink. Again, the next morning, before sunrise, actually a little bit before sunrise, they stop eating and drinking again, and then they spend the day not eating and drinking during daylight hours. Now, again, I mentioned this was for healthy adult Muslims. When is somebody considered an adult? In Islam, one is considered an adult when one comes of age. So at puberty, one is considered an adult. So anywhere from 11 to 15 years old, each person, takes on the rituals and duties of their faith on an individual basis. But generally speaking, it would be right around 11 to 12 years old. And if you look, that's right around the time, or maybe even 13, right around the time of the bar and bat mitzvah ages and the confirmation age. That's when everybody is coming into being young adults and taking on the responsibility of following their faith and understanding how to follow their faith. There are some young ladies who come of age much younger, at the age of 7, 8, or 9. Their family, their communities will pretty much not consider them adults, and they're not really permitted to fast until they get to about 11 to 12 years old, just because they still need to grow and they still, their body still needs the nutrients at that point, because the fast during the month of Ramadan is not easy, and it's not meant to be easy. In fact, women, during their menstrual cycle during Ramadan are actually asked to not fast for that week. And I joke about this saying, well, Muslims already knew about, low sugar and PMS not mixing well. But the idea being one is already weakened and not well during the menstrual cycle. And then to add no sugar to that would be very, very difficult, and no food. And so once, the menstrual cycle is over, once that's over, they can catch up the fast that they missed after Ramadan's over. They can always catch those up. Now, what happens during the month of Ramadan? And I did mention to you earlier that the Quran is very, very important to Muslims because they believe that it was revealed for the first time. The first revelation came down during the month of Ramadan. During this time, many Muslims who have spent the year not really connecting with the Quran, not, coming to it daily and reciting, will try and reconnect. They'll try and sit down and read a few passages a day, maybe even a few lines a day. Some will sit down and study it in terms of trying to look at translations and interpretations and what the essence is and what it means. There is usually an uptick in the community of people meeting together and praying together at the mosques and spending a lot of time in community, breaking fast together, bringing meals to each other and inviting people over to fast, break your fast. Obviously, in a time of COVID-19, that is not going to happen this year. It's going to be very, very different. Muslims are going to be in their homes, although they're going to observe the fasting and all the prayer and ritual and reading Quran and reconnecting and reflection. All of that's going to take place, but more on a family and individual basis rather than a community-wide basis. Mosques and scholars around America and around the world are trying to help with this and putting a lot of their um, educational and spiritual programming online, just like we're doing here today, using the many different online platforms that we have. So that's being made available to Muslims, especially those who are going to be all alone in their homes. So they have somewhere to turn and somebody who's going to help them along with reconnecting with themselves, with their religion, with their Quran and their prayer and worship. So this is, Muslims talk about celebrating the month of Ramadan. It is meant to be a whole month of celebration of all of the blessings one has and appreciation and awareness of what one doesn't have, what others don't have, and how we as fellow humans can show compassion and take care of others. So it's basically a month of creating new and better habits for oneself, raising awareness. So that's where Ramadan is supposed to be. And again, just like Easter was very, very different and Passover was very different this year, Ramadan is also going to be extremely different for us this year. Going to move on to the next one. The fifth pillar of Islam is a pilgrimage to Mecca. Mecca is the place I told you about in Western Saudi Arabia. This is a pilgrimage that is required once in our lifetimes if we can afford to go without getting into debt, and also if we can make that pilgrimage without being a physical burden on those around us, right? So if I'm physically able to and financially able to go, I'm required to go at least once in my lifetime and conduct this pilgrimage, which lasts anywhere from 3 to 5 days, conducted in the 12th month of the Muslim calendar. So usually about 3 months after the month of Ramadan. Now, this picture that you see, I'm going to go forward one and then come back to this one. Now you'll see this is a cube-shaped building. It is not a black building. It's covered with a black cloth that has a lot of gold embroidery on it. And if one could zoom into that, you will notice that is gold calligraphy using passages from the Quran all the way around. And that cloth is changed out once a year and put over the Kaaba. The Kaaba, or what Muslims believe, was built by the Prophet Abraham and his son Ishmael as the first house of worship for one God. You'll notice people down around it bowing down in prayer. Muslims around the world, and even there, pray towards the Kaaba, not to it. There's a difference. Muslims don't pray to anything or anyone on earth. They pray to an unseen God, and the only reason they pray towards the Kaaba is for the sake of uniformity. So there's no confusion that people are, praying at each other and against each other and all of that. So if you notice in this picture over here, all those little white dots towards the center, up at the top, you can, not quite at the top, but center top-ish, you can see the Kaaba right there. and surrounding it, you can see all those little white dots inside the mosque as well as spilling outside the mosque. That's between, actually, it's actually more like 3 to 4 million Muslims now that go for Hajj, and those are all people there at the time of prayer. This picture of this mosque has a capacity of 1.7 million people, and you can see that they've already started overflowing. In fact, I think Saudi Arabia is now starting an expansion project to build a bigger mosque in that area. But if you look towards your top left in the background there, you will notice it's a very modern city. Makkah is a city like any other with high rises and hotels and malls. In fact, this picture that is over here looks like it was taken from the fourth floor Burger King of the mall that's right next door. And yes, I did say Burger King. I stood at that Burger King eating and looking down at that very site. So I'm assuming this was taken from somewhere around there. A very modern city, but a very ancient um, prayer and ritual that takes place once a year there. And if you Google online today, because of the coronavirus, that whole space is completely empty, which I don't think Muslims have seen in decades. And you may want to just, Google that. That is an interesting site at this point. Now, Muslims celebrate two major holidays. One is celebrated after the month of Ramadan ends. So for us, it'll be right around the 23rd, 24th of May. And the next one will be about 2 months, 10 days after that. So right around August, I believe. Is that 2 months, 10 days, or am I making that up? 2 months, yeah, right around the beginning of August. I apologize, beginning of August. So the word Eid in Arabic means festival. Eid al-Fitr is the festival of the breaking of the fast, and Eid al-Adha is the festival of the sacrifice. Now, both of these days are 3 to 4 day holidays. Both of them start off the same way. Muslims start by giving to charity first thing in the morning, and after that, they conduct a congregational prayer and then spend the next 3 or 4 days visiting friends and family and celebrating, wishing each other a happy Eid. Obviously, again, this year, that's going to be very different. All of us are expecting at the end of May to still be in our homes, not have a congregational prayer. The giving to charity portion of it's not going to change, but visiting friends and family and all of that is going to be different. I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of online engagement with chatting and conversations and celebration that way, but no getting together. And I'm assuming early August will probably be in a similar position. I don't know yet. But again, these holidays are going to be different for us for a little bit. Now, I've talked to you about Muslim beliefs and I've talked to you about Muslim practices. What I want to talk about is what I'm supposed to do with those. It's all very well for me to believe in God and his angels and the holy books and to pray and to fast and to give to charity, but then not being a good person with that doesn't work, right? So just being good for myself doesn't work. I need to, as a Muslim, be out there and take care of people around me. I need to speak politely and kindly and respectfully to those younger than me, to those older than me, to those richer than me, to those poorer than me. Everybody deserves the same kind treatment. Everybody deserves for me to be able to help them to the best of my capabilities. Not all of us are rich and famous and all, whatever I can do to make somebody else's life better. So that would be my faith in action and action. I need to make sure that I don't just do for myself, which are my beliefs and practices. They're pretty much for me bettering me. Now I need to put that into action and do this. Now, the word ihsan, the third dimension, is excellence in character, right? The word ihsan comes from the root word hasana, which again means beauty or to beautify, to make things beautiful. Now, that doesn't mean that Muslims are going around painting up the world and making it gorgeous and planting flowers. What that means is what I just said to you, is that every interaction I as a Muslim have with another person, they should feel that they were respected, that I cared about them, that I would take care of them. My neighbors, Muslims are basically told that their neighbors should never fear their actions or their words. My neighbors should never fear me for any reason. In fact, they should be able to say they can depend on me. As a Muslim, this is very important for me. And so these are important things for Muslims. Now, following the golden rule is where I would be at. And again, I'm going to move to this, and you'll notice the golden rule is iterated in many, religious traditions. And for Muslims, you'd have the one that says, none of you are real believers until you wish for others what you wish for yourself. Now I'm going to leave this slide up. I believe we already have one question, and it says, how do metaphors play into the overall Muslim understanding of heaven and hell or various other popular teachings within the religion? Could these places or various teachings exist only internally? Wonderful question. I am not a scholar. I am not amazing at interpreting these, but on an individual basis, people have different ways that they interpret. There are Muslims who are basically going to tell you absolutely 100% heaven and hell exist in reality, and we will go through physical pain and physical pleasure. Others will tell you that it is um, a state of mind. So depending on who you speak to and who, what that Muslim believes, that's what you're going to hear from them. Everybody has a different interpretation of what that means, but Muslims in general, I believe, are going to believe in an actual heaven and an actual hell, in actual physical, happiness or physical unhappiness and pain. I hope that helped. Next question is, in order to meet the requirements of praying 5 times a day, does that mean you must be up before sunrise? Is 4 times still acceptable? That's actually a very cute question, because quite honestly, I make it sound, I didn't want to make it sound like 1.8 billion Muslims are praying 5 times a day. They really are not. I believed that it was 1 out of every 5 Muslims that was doing that, and I was very disappointed when one imam told me it was more like 1 out of 10 Muslims that was praying at all, let alone 5 times a day. There are Muslims who pray 5 times a day. There are Muslims who pray 3 times a day. There are Muslims who pray 2 times a day. Muslims who even just pray once a day. Everybody is on a journey to bettering themselves, so they make an effort. And some, like I said, who never pray. But what this is a relationship between one and one's creator. So there is nobody who's going to keep track of whether I'm praying 5 times or I'm not praying 5 times and how I'm praying. It's between me and God. If I do, yay. If I don't, yay. Whichever it is, I'm going to deal with that on a personal level with my creator. Hopefully that answered your question. Next question is, when did Islam first come about and what areas of the world did it begin? Okay. We believe that Islam, as a, very difficult to say this in ways that make sense. Islam means a way of life where one is trying to achieve inner peace by, submitting to the will of God or obeying God's laws. Now, if you look at that, Christians do that, Jews do that, all practicing people in these Abrahamic traditions, they are striving for inner peace by obeying God's rules. So if that's the meaning, then it's just a way of life. Islam is just a way of life. But this Islam with a capital I, this religious tradition that you're talking about, I would probably say right around 1460 years ago or so. Actually, more than that, right? Yeah, 1460 years ago. So about 20 years before we start the calendar, when the Prophet Muhammad, we believe, received revelation. Obviously, it started in Makkah and kind of moved its way outwards in every direction, going, into Medina, down southwards, and across North Africa, and into Iran, and up into the Levant, and eastwards as well as into Spain and into India, and down into Malaysia, Indonesia, and stuff. So it spread that way. So hopefully that answered your question. And the next question is, what are the beliefs for afterlife? Does the faith believe in the devil? So those are two separate questions. What are the beliefs for afterlife? Muslims do believe in heaven and hell. We believe that, you know, doing things right and not hurting others and living a good, clean, righteous life are ways of going towards, going to heaven. Hurting others, doing evil deeds would be a way to get into hell, which is meant to be a very ugly place. Yes, the faith does believe in the devil, just like Christianity and Judaism. Muslims believe in the story of Adam and Eve. We believe in not a fallen angel, but a fallen being who disobeyed God. His name, we refer to him as Iblis, Beelzebub, also the devil, Shaitan, Satan. All of those words are there. Now, is the devil or Satan or Shaitan or Iblis, is he available? Is he around in physical form? Like we would see in movies and stuff, and we would imagine. Maybe not. In his physical form, according to Muslims, would be an unseen fire, a very, very hot fire. So, and not unseen, a smokeless fire. So it would be in a different dimension. But yes, according to Muslims, the devil does exist. But in the Quran, there are references to the devil as the evil whisperer, right? So whatever's happening between these 2 points over here, all of that, crazy stuff that we go through, should I do it? Should I not? All of that, that's also the devil. So the evil whisperer is what's going on between our ears and how we're trying to, you know, justify a bad deed and stuff like that. So hopefully that answered your question. And thank you. You guys are asking wonderful questions. If there's something that I haven't answered completely the way you wish to, please ask again, and I will try and add to that. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Let me see. There are a couple of things that I wanted to point out. Oh, people always ask how Muslims celebrate Eid. Well, as you can see when I showed you in the map that Muslims can be found all the way from Indonesia all the way to America. And so celebrations of Eid are very cultural. So whatever one considers celebration and partying is what people do. I grew up in Kuwait, and with us, we used to put lighting outside our house. We decorate inside the house. My parents and grandparents would have specific types of foods that they prepared, and we received gifts. Other people have different ways of celebrating. Oh, we have another question. Hold on. Just as Christians have different denominations with slightly different practices, is it the same in Islam? Yes, it is. In Islam, we have one major division. It's considered a major division, but it's really not that significant. It's Shia and Sunni. So what you have is anywhere from 13 to 15% of the world's Muslims being Shia, and anywhere from 85 to 87% of the world's Muslims being Sunni. They all believe in all of the things I just went over. They believe in one God, in his prophets, in his angels, in the holy books. They pray 5 times a day. They fast during the month of Ramadan. They give to charity. They do all of those things exactly the same way. There may be slight variations on how one stands when one prays. There may be slight variations on how one dresses when one prays. But most of the time, it's very, very similar. Now, within the Sunni, uh, uh, the Sunnis of the world, there are so many schools of thought, and within those schools of thought, there are many slight divisions of who belongs to what group. But again, all of that boils down to they're all Muslim, they're all praying to one God, believe in the Prophet Muhammad and his message, and all of the other prophets that came before him. Certain things may vary a little bit in terms of certain things being allowed and not allowed. And the same within the Shia group, you're going to have certain divisions that are broken up over the centuries, over certain, divisions that go off. But you're going to hear about different titles for these groups. But again, the main 2 divisions are that. Thank you for that question. Another question is, have you ever experienced any distasteful treatment while in America? Whew. Mm, Not significantly. In fact, in all of the time I've been here, I've heard, and I thank God for this, I've heard of other people being mistreated because of their faith. I have only ever been somewhat threatened one time, indirectly by a person who decided that they were going to not look at me, but he and I were the only people on a school campus for, I don't know why it was such an empty campus at that time, especially since I'd finished presenting to about 200 students. All of a sudden, lunchtime, everyone disappeared, and I was trying to head to my car, and this person walked up very close to me, looking somewhere else, and used profanity. And I imagined that it wasn't. Um, and I just kept going because I didn't want to engage since we were the only 2 people there. And as I started walking away, he started pretending to talk on the phone, shouting louder and louder as I got further and further away, saying that he was sick and tired of these people coming from different religions and trying to tell others what they believe in and what they do. And I was kind of grateful that I got in my car and drove off. So that was literally the only time I've ever felt anything close to being mistreated. On the whole, my neighbors, everyone I've ever come across in this country has been nothing but amazing. Amazing and protective and defensive for me, and constantly calling me up to find out how I do. So I love being here. I love being an American. I love the way, my friends and family and my neighbors treat me. Last question. What makes the 2 divisions different? All right, I'll go into a little bit of difference. At the time the Prophet Muhammad passed away, um, there was a dispute between his family members and others in the community as to who would lead the community, not as a religious leader, but as an administrative leader, who would lead the community going forward now that the Prophet was no longer around. Um, there is a there was a disagreement as to how that took place and how somebody got chosen. The family members felt that his cousin should have been the next leader. Others felt that they voted for, um, you know, another leader within the Muslim community. And so the 4 leaders that came one after the other after the Prophet Muhammad passed away were called the Khalifas, the 4 caliphs, and they were done with voting amongst the people. And the 4th one to be voted in was the Prophet's cousin after many, many years of these 3 passing away. The division did not necessarily happen at that time. When things started to break away and people started to fight amongst themselves, the crack that had started off as a tiny division started getting bigger and wider and bigger and wider. So, like I said, the religious portion of this is not a significant difference. The difference has always been very political, and very it's more based on the politics of how communities were treated and what happened afterwards, more than the actual theology and spiritual belief system within the faith. Sunnis and Shias marry, intermarry. People don't always agree with that, just like it was with, Catholics and Protestants. Not every family member was on board with people intermarrying within the faiths, the denominations or the faith, the sects, but they are ultimately, at least religiously, following the same faith. I can't give you much more that's different other than in a historic way, in terms of historical events that are what makes those divisions more. And I'm going to stop there because I think we've now run out of time. I thank you all very much for joining us, and I'm going to give this back to Professor Moad.
Okay, I don't have anything else. I just want to thank everybody for attending, and thank you, Azra Hussain, also for coming again to give us this remote presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.